Some things we talk about or that we hear about in life are going to make us uncomfortable, but that's a price we have to pay for education and for democracy.
My name is Max Nospish. I'm the manager of education and visitor experiences at the First Amendment Museum located in Augusta, Maine. Today, I'm joined by Mary Beth Tinker for this episode of our one-on-one interview series. Mary Beth, if you want to take a moment to introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Mary Beth Tinker. I'm living in Washington, D.C., and I was a plaintiff in a Supreme Court case that was decided in 1969 called Tinker versus Des Moines.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I think your reputation precedes yourself in some ways. But for those of you who don't know, Mary Beth is most famous for the Supreme Court case Tinker v. Des Moines, as she just said. So, Mary Beth, what led to this case was you and some of your fellow students wearing black armbands to school in 1965 when you were only 13 years old. What made you want to wear this armband, and how did your fellow students react to you wearing it?
Well, there were a number of factors involved with us wearing the black armbands to school and getting suspended for doing that. For one thing, my brother John and I were raised basically in the church in many ways. Our father was a Methodist minister, and our mother was also very involved with her faith. And then we became Quakers at some point also. And my father even went to work for the Quakers with the American Friends Service Committee. So all of that had a huge effect on our knowledge about the Vietnam War and our desire to take action also. And this effort, in a way, personally for me, it built on, and legally, it built on efforts of Black students speaking up for racial justice. Because in 1963, the Birmingham Children's Crusade was attacked when their headquarters, the 16th Street Baptist Church, was bombed by white supremacists. And so when four little girls, Cynthia, Addie Mae, Carol, and Denise, were murdered in that bombing in 1963, the writer James Baldwin suggested that we should all wear black armbands and that we should have memorial services. And he was supported in that call by Bayard Rustin, another leader in the civil rights movement. So in Iowa, we did exactly that. We wore black armbands at a memorial service to mourn for the little children who'd been killed in Birmingham. So that was our first experience with black armbands. And then the next year was Mississippi Freedom Summer, when three students, Cheney, Schwerner, and Goodman, three young people, Cheney, Schwerner, and Goodman, were killed in Mississippi for helping to register Black voters. And so Black high school students in Mississippi that fall wore buttons to school that said, "One man, one vote," to protest the murders. And they were told they could not do that. It led to a lawsuit in the appeals court in Mississippi, which ruled that students should be able to express their views in public school as long as they don't substantially disrupt school. So that was decided in 1966, but we didn't know about all of that. But it was the precedent case for the later Tinker ruling. In 1965, soon right before we wore the black armbands to school, there was a big rally, the first national rally against the war in Washington, D.C. And some students and adults from Iowans for Peace went to that rally, including my brother, my mother, Chris Eckhart, our sister Bonnie, Chris's mother, and others. So they came home talking about what we could do in Des Moines to speak up about the war. And so that's how someone came up with the idea of wearing black armbands again, this time not for the Birmingham children, but to mourn the dead in Vietnam and to support a Christmas truce that year in 1965. So those are some of the events that led up to us going to the Supreme Court, with the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, representing us, and a fine lawyer named Dan Johnston. That's how we ended up in the Supreme Court after we were suspended that year in 1965.
And what was it like going through the legal system with this case? Was it stressful, and how did your family take it all?
The whole experience was kind of crazy because we didn't realize that this small action that we took was going to become a big thing. And we thought maybe it would be over that week or the week after we wore the black armband. The school had allowed black armbands if students were mourning the death of school spirit. If not enough kids came to the football game, oh, that's okay. You can talk about that. But no, no, not war. We're not going to have that discussed here. So that's why it's a youth rights issue. But it really was kind of bewildering in a way because we were speaking up for peace. We were speaking up for peace at Christmas time that year. And, people would send little Christmas cards around saying peace on earth. And we thought, yeah, why don't you adults try it sometime? Peace on earth. But suddenly people were sending us bomb threats and, hate mail in the mail, calling us communists. And my mother would always say, we're not communists, we're Methodists. But it was just kind of crazy, the experience of, and life went on, our ordinary lives, going roller skating and, things like, but the worst thing was the war went on also. And by the time we won in 1969, it was one of the worst years for the Vietnam War. And so it was a little hard to be real happy when we won the case because, oh, now we can wear a little black ribbon on our arm, hooray. But in the meantime, the war was raging and 3 to 4 million Vietnamese would be killed and over 58,000 US soldiers directly killed in the war. But the effects of the Vietnam War go on today. There are still about 20 Vietnam veterans per day who kill themselves. And so our country is, good at sending people off to war, but not so good at supporting the families of veterans and the active military. So working at the VA hospital later as a nurse, I became a nurse. I learned more about all of that as well.
And you've already touched on this a little bit, but what exactly was the Supreme Court's verdict? And again, you've also touched on this, but how did you feel, and how did the people around you feel when the Supreme Court came back with their verdict in 1969? Which, if anybody's listening and has noticed, that's years after this whole case began. And what is the lasting legacy of Tinker v. Des Moines?
It was a very strong ruling at the Supreme Court in 1969 on February 24th, written by Justice Abe Fortas, saying that students are persons under our Constitution with the rights and responsibilities of persons, and saying that schools should not be enclaves of totalitarianism, and that neither students or teachers leave their constitutional right to expression when they enter the schoolhouse gate. And also a very important part of the ruling, which is so true today, is that some things we talk about or that we hear about in life are going to make us uncomfortable. But that's a price we have to pay for education and for democracy. And it's a beautifully written treatise really on what education should be in a democracy.
And what was your life like after the Supreme Court ruling? And I gotta ask, is it weird having your name forever associated with student free speech and taught in classrooms throughout the country?
There were 3 plaintiffs in the case, me, my brother John, and a boy named Chris Eckhart, our friend. But there were 5 students suspended, including Bruce Clark and Chris Singer as well, who chose not to be part of the case. But for each of us, our lives after the ruling were different. For me, I had no idea how important this ruling was going to be, or that we would be talking about it over 50 years later, and that it would be cited in thousands of cases having to do with student free speech in public schools and even out of school. But I first realized how important the case was, I think, when I was in nursing school, and the case was in my nursing school book. And that's when I realized that this this case should be seen in the context of youth rights, which is really an international human rights issue. And that it's important because the ruling affirms the rights of young people to have a say and to affect the policies that affect their lives. And so that's when I had to figure out how to make this experience be useful in terms of furthering the status of young people. Because as a nurse, I worked mostly with children and teenagers, and I was a trauma nurse and I was a family nurse practitioner. And I saw up close and personally how, children are not getting a fair deal in our society. They're the most likely to live in poverty, for example. And I was taking care of kids who were shot and kids who were breathing in polluted air and drinking polluted water with lead in it. And I said, wow, these kids aren't getting a fair deal, and they need to start using their First Amendment rights and advocating for their own interests. And I think that is a powerful use of the First Amendment, and it always has been for disrespected groups, whether it was Native Americans or African Americans, immigrants, women, Latinos, and also youth are a disrespected group in our society. And the First Amendment is very important for them to improve their status. And I'm so glad that so many youth are using the First Amendment today to improve their conditions and their world.
And that's a great segue for our final question. What message or advice would you give to students today who want to use their free speech rights?
I always encourage students to use your rights so that you don't lose your rights, and to know your rights. And I admire the teachers and administrators all over the country who are teaching students about the First Amendment and are encouraging them to speak up, whether it's to speak up against book bannings or censorship of certain subjects in school, like LGBTQ issues or African American history or Native American history, whatever it is that some people, want to censor. Young people are speaking up for that and saying, wait, it's not us who asked for the book banning. It's not us who asked to censor, African American education. It's adults, and youth should be honored and should also weigh in on these issues. And I'm so glad that so many young people are doing that. I think that it's like using your muscles. If you don't use your rights, you could lose your rights. And I also encourage young people that it's a good way of life. You don't win all the time, but it's still a good way of life. It's meaningful, and you meet interesting, important people that are speaking up for a better way of doing things. And no, we're not going to settle for the way things are right now. We're going to keep working together to improve things, and that's a good way of life.
Well, Mary Beth, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure. Before you go, I want to give you your free speech moment. So if you have anything you want to promote, plug, get out there, share, any final message or words, now is your moment.
Our effort in wearing the armbands to speak up about the Vietnam War was a group project. It was led by students, and adults were also involved in it. It's never a one-person effort when people speak up and stand up. And yes, I was a shy, scared kid in many ways, but I learned the lesson that even a shy person, even a person who's nervous and scared, can find something to do to speak up about the issues that affect their lives. And when you do, I found that it's a good way of life.
Excellent, Mary Beth. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I admire your work with the First Amendment Museum and promoting the First Amendment. Thank you.